Welcome, and thanks so much for speaking to us today for the ABCO newsletter. I'll first of all introduce you. So I've got with me today Sarah Garry, who's the Executive Officer of British Society of Soil Science, and Collette Black-Heaton, the Director of Operations at Speakeasy. And Sarah and I sat next to each other at an event earlier in the spring, and she was telling me all about the conference that she'd got planned for this summer. And I thought it would be an ideal opportunity to sort of catch up afterwards and find out how it had actually gone, because you had some amazing goals and ambitions for it, didn't you, Sarah? Do you want to just give us a little bit of an overview first about what you were trying to achieve? And it was the global one, wasn't it? Not just the UK.
That's right. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Heather. Yes, so we bid for the World Congress of Soil Science 2022 about 8 years ago, and Collette has been involved with that process for the whole time as well. I was quite late to the party and joined the British Society a couple of years ago, so led on the sort of latter stages of development. But this has been quite a long time coming, as with many world congresses and international congresses. The proposal for hosting the event in the UK had to go to an international council to agree, so it took a significant amount of time to actually get here. But in terms of what we wanted to achieve, we wanted to make this particular World Congress more than just the science. And of course, the science is incredibly important and has to be the staple of any international scientific congress. But we wanted there to be lots of encompassing and enriching activities that surrounded the Congress. So everything from arts engagement, and we were lucky enough to have a number of arts organisations with us during the Congress, through to assessing our environmental impact. And as an environmental charity, it was incredibly important to us that we were really clear about what our impact was from the outset and how we could possibly reduce that. And in addition to that, we were also really keen to undertake lots of outreach as well, to raise awareness of the importance of soil and soil science to a wider community. So we engaged with the Science Centre up in Glasgow to make sure that we were offering some outreach activities for young people and their families during the summer holidays too. So I suppose that's it in a nutshell.
Amazing scope. And you said with the sustainability that you wanted it to be more sustainable. So had you got any measures from previously that have been used at other congresses, or was this sort of a stake in the sand? And sort of how did you decide what your goals were really for the sustainability side of it, and how did you go about measuring them?
That's a really good question. And Collette was at the previous Congress in Rio, which unfortunately I hadn't started by that point, but there was nothing. There was no sustainability, no environmental impact assessment. So this really was starting from scratch. And we decided that we wanted to understand and have a baseline for how sustainable the Congress was. And we went away and did a little bit of research and realized that there was very little academic literature out there which looked at the environmental impacts of international congresses or conferences more generally. So that was really our starting point, that we wanted to understand what impact our Congress had. But whilst doing that, also wanted to make sure that we reduced our impact where possible. So it wasn't just doing things as things would normally be done. It was making a concerted effort to reduce and reuse where possible, but also then with those aspects taken into account, undertake an environmental impact assessment at the same time. So we were lucky enough to have an amazing student who was undertaking a master's degree at Cranfield University, Alexandre Couvet, who delivered his thesis on the environmental impacts of the World Congress of Soil Science.
Wow. That sounds it sounds like you got the right person at the right time then.
Yeah, he's an incredibly talented researcher. He has 2 master's degrees in environmental impacts, one from the UK and one in France. So like I said, really talented researcher, and we're just in the process of looking at how we publish that research now, and how we can make sure that as many people as possible have access to that. So we're looking at submitting that work to a journal, so an academic journal. And we also plan to have some recommendations come out in time for the ICCA conference, which will be held in November. So watch this space for those recommendations, for things that convention centres and international destinations can do to make events more sustainable.
Fantastic. And oh dear, excuse me. It sounds like you started that really quite early on in the journey towards the conference. It wasn't just sort of a last minute thing, was it? You know, you sort of planned it and incorporated it in as you went. How did you get the other stakeholders involved? Because my initial thought when you were saying you were going to have a sustainable conference was you would stay in one place and you would keep it sort of quite tight, but actually you didn't, did you? You went off and you, as you say, you had an outreach and you went off to different arts venues and had dinners in different places. How did you get all of those different stakeholders to sort of buy into your vision and help you on this journey?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and maybe Collette can jump in here actually, because I'd be interested to know how you felt we approached it, Collette. But it's easy for me to give my perspective, but you were the one that had to translate that vision.
Yeah, but I think also you were very clear about what you were trying to achieve. And for example, with the venues that we selected, we were very careful in regards to how people were having to travel. So were we having to transport people and impact that, or could we choose venues that people could reach on foot? So there was that taken into account. Also the menus, everything that was chosen, we made sure that it was all local and local produce. So making sure again that the impact was lessened at every stage. So it was looking at those sorts of things as to, again, how movement was, in regards to if people were having to move from one place to another. And then also with the SEC, working with them and their team, they have very, obviously, that they're very sustainable and they have a very strong approach to it. And they advised also along the way. We set up, Sarah had separate meetings with them and also had outlined goals that she was looking to achieve. And then in regards to how we built the exhibition, how we import, any of the contractors or subcontractors that we were using, we made sure that the supply chain was conducive, basically, so that everything was as we reduced the impact of travel, for example, as much as we could control it. So that also overall had quite an impact where everything that we could limit. And again, from the SEC, from Kelvin Grove, anything that we're using in the tours as well, with companies that we're using, again, all local. So it also tried to reduce that impact.
Fantastic. And you obviously set yourself some goals, even though you sort of only could put a stake in the sand at the beginning, and you've obviously measured as you went, or your researcher as well has measured as you've gone along. Were the results something that were unexpected for you, or did they go as planned?
Yeah, it was really interesting actually. So the major outcome, I suppose, is that the Congress, based on something like 1,500-ish attending in person and a couple of hundred online, so 1,700 in total, that it had the greenhouse gas impact equivalent of about 500 people in the UK, their annual greenhouse gas emissions, which is just incredibly high. The majority of that impact obviously comes from travel, particularly international travel and flights. But there was still quite a significant impact from things like catering, as you would expect. There were also very similar results for our water usage, so he looked into that as well. The things that reduced our impact the most were actually having an app. So reducing the amount of paper we printed. You'll remember in the past, you would print 1,500 pages per person for an abstract book, and you'd have multiple amendments in the upcoming days before the event. So getting rid of that obviously had a major impact on the reduction in our both greenhouse gas emissions and our water. But his research also indicated that there are lots of other ways that we could reduce those emissions in future. So, for example, looking at the international community and really looking at the detail of where those international members of the society that's running the Congress are. So he identified what the ideal place to host the World Congress of Soil Science would be in future, based on those international participants and where they're based around the world, where it would be easiest for them to get to.
So is that where you're going next?
Well, unfortunately, that's not my decision to make. That's the International Society's decision to make. It's definitely made me think about our impact in terms of being a British society and what we can do in future to manage those impacts, as I said, as a British society. So next year, for example, we are in early stage discussions with the Irish Society, trying to combine our meetings so that rather than hosting two separate meetings, we're hosting one meeting in Northern Ireland instead, which will obviously reduce our impact because we're hosting it together. So we're collaborating rather than having two separate events. So there are smaller things like that we can implement, but we will definitely have some recommendations for our parent body, the International Union of Soil Sciences, on what they could do in future to limit the Congress's environmental impact.
Fantastic. But presumably you're also going to sort of balance some of those, he might come back and say, well, actually it's best to just do it virtually because you cut down on so much, but that takes away a lot of the benefits of the face-to-face meetings, the in-person meetings. Presumably you still see that there is an advantage of having a in-person event as well, or do you think you would be pushed towards a virtual?
It definitely, and I'm sure Collette will want to add to this shortly, but again, one of Alexandre's recommendations is that potentially there are parallel events held globally. So you have one in the Americas, one held in Europe, one held in Asia at the same time, and the programming's at slightly different times. So you end up with 3 semi-hybrid events, semi-local events, reducing the amount of emissions it takes for people to get to their local event, but then they have access to all of that programming internationally while still having the networking opportunities locally. So that could be something that international congresses look to implement in future.
Good luck with that, Collette, with the time zones. Collette be working 24 hours a day.
I think also just to go on that, I mean, the one thing that I found quite interesting was in regards to the ratio for in-person versus virtual. We were doing it as a hybrid event. So I would have expected also there to be a much higher virtual attendance, and there wasn't. It was about 1,370 in person, and then 360 were virtual. That's a huge difference. We expected much higher on the virtual side, especially in regards to still having the impacts from Brexit, from the conflict in Europe, what's going on with, with COVID still impacting people traveling. We expected that to be much higher. So it was quite surprising. And that's because everybody wanted to get together. And there was a very big, that's a huge impact. And you can't take away from that, the amount of collaboration that takes place at an in-person event. Yeah. The hybrid side, what live streaming can achieve and the reach it can. And I agree with having the time zones and having hubs that you can have a central and a simultaneous parallel running events would be ideal. But again, taking it away and just going virtually, for some events that will work. And I understand that, but for many, the impact that we've seen over this past year and from people's comments, they want to be together. You can't replicate the actual being face-to-face and having those informal confirmations that leads to further collaboration, especially within the scientific communities. So I was very pleasantly surprised to see such a want for the in-person events again, but obviously there is an impact, and it's just about managing that and the recommendations.
Yeah, no, I can completely see that. And from the round tables and things that we've had recently, people are struggling to get people to join virtually. They'd much rather, more people are choosing to join in person, definitely.
And I'd just add to that, Heather, if you don't mind, that I think part of the challenge with hybrid as well is the expense. It is still very expensive to deliver, and we all want to do the right thing and want to offer hybrid to make sure that people don't have to travel if they don't need to. But I think there's a delicate balance. People expect online access to be free. They don't like to pay for anything that's online. They expect it to be free or very cheap to access. and to pay for that hybrid element, actually it is quite expensive. I can't remember the cost of our tickets, Collette, but it was a couple of £100 per person for the week. And I think that is part of the reason that people didn't engage as much as perhaps we'd hoped they were, because we just had to price it that way to make sure that we could deliver all of those hybrid elements.
And that was part of the challenge, wasn't it? When COVID first hit, people were doing stuff for free, and people then expect it to be for free, and it just can't continue to be. And especially if you're live streaming and things, and they're still getting the content, aren't they? So there's still that opportunity to have that. So it is just about getting the balance. You're not the only one who's struggling with that. Lots of people definitely are. What would you say you're most proud of? What bit of it would you go, oh my gosh, this is what we're proud of?
We were incredibly lucky to work with Collette and her team, and also the amazing Glasgow Convention Bureau. And I think hosting the event in Scotland for international delegates was just amazing. So our gala dinner at the Kelvin Grove, the food was fantastic. We had an amazing live Ceilidh band. We also had a fantastic piper on day one at our opening ceremony, piping people across the river and playing AC/DC tunes for international tourists, which they loved. So it was the extra bits that added to the scientific congress, which I think people will go away and remember, and which make me incredibly proud that people will remember those things. They've got more than just the scientific congress. They've got, you know, the social and the cultural activities which came along with it. I suppose the other bit that I'm really proud of is the way we were able to engage with the arts community, which is something that the international congresses haven't done so much of previously. And hopefully it's got our scientists to think about soil in a slightly different way. So, for example, we had the Scottish Potters Association at the Congress, and they showcased a range of locally produced pottery, where many of the potters had used hand dug clay. So they'd gone out into the wild and dug up their own clay and then produced some amazing pottery from it. I've got some up on my wall, which you can't quite see, but I've been showing off very proudly. So that kind of thing, getting the scientists to see that soil is incredibly important from a scientific aspect, but is also incredibly important from a cultural aspect as well.
Fantastic. It sounds like you really got that sense of place, didn't you? And you can't get that the same when you try to do something virtually, can you? It's so evocative, isn't it? The sights, the sounds, the smells, everything else just sort of brings it together. And if you had one learning point to share, what would that be? What would you do differently if it was to come back to you next time?
Oh, Collette, you can go first. I'll leave you with the hard ones.
No, I think there's just things. I think we're playing in a new landscape now, and I think there are things that over the last couple of years that we've learned, and I definitely think for moving forward, things that, in regards to Congress timelines and things like that, I think that they need to be revisited, just in regards to the impacts that, for a big part, what happened with our program was because of visa problems, and that was obviously because of Brexit and changes with passport regulations, the Home Office being swamped, many things, and COVID and delays. There were many changes to the program in the last 2 months, and from our side, you always have changes, without a doubt, any Congress, we all know that. But this was unprecedented. I'd never seen this volume of having to constantly churn around different speakers and changing, because there were so many different elements being impacted. And although it was almost like a perfect storm of different things that have happened, and we hope not to happen again, I do think it's like something for me is being mindful of that and using that in regards to the planning to use buffers, just to try and maximize the number of people who can attend, ensuring that any processes like that, they have that, like the time to be able to make the necessary arrangements as well. So I do think from that sort of thing, that was the one thing that was a very big key factor, was, all the deadlines and everything that we've been working to for years, they all worked. They were 100% correct in what we've done in the past, spot on. But with these different elements being thrown in now, you needed to have that expanded. And it's definitely something I would look to build in as a buffer for future congresses as well.
Fantastic, thanks Collette. And I know Sarah, you've talked about the legacy and you're wanting that long-lasting legacy from the conference. I think part of that, by the sound of it, is sort of the research that you hope to get published in journals. That's sort of almost for the conference community, isn't it? What would your legacy be for the Soil Association?
I think we've got a few different ideas for our legacy. You're quite right. These recommendations for the conference industry are incredibly important to us, because we recognise that that this isn't about us in isolation. We can spearhead this, but we need everybody else to follow and make changes as well. And we've definitely learned some things, having worked with the SEC, about particularly around catering, what can be provided, what can't be provided, and what venues and conference centres need to work on in future to make sure that they can deliver a sustainable event for their clients. So as I said earlier, we'll have some research coming out later in the year, which we'd be delighted if you shared with your members once it's available.
That would be amazing.
Otherwise, I think legacy wise for us, in terms of soil, we'd really like to secure the legacy from the tours we delivered. So we went around the country digging lots of soil pits and analysing lots of different types of soil, and we want to make that available to as wide an audience as possible. So watch this space for next year. I'll have another big project to deliver, which will be some sort of digital web hosting of soil pit information, which I'm hoping will start as UK wide, but who knows, maybe we'll go on and take on the globe, global soil pits in future.
I don't expect anything less.
Thank you, thanks for your confidence.
Take on the world. Brilliant. Is there anything that I've not covered today that you think I really should have spoken to you about?
Collette, no, I think that was super. Thank you.
No, well, thanks so much for sharing with us. I think it's so important to get people's ideas, and how motivated you are and how inspired you are to take things forward. It is so lovely to see, and thanks for sharing. And please do share that research with us later. We would love to share that as well.
Thanks, Heather.
That's great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.